Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases in the history of the American Northwest. Before we start, please tell us where you are watching from and what time it is when you are listening to this narration. We want to know where and when these documented accounts happen. 27 men went into the thick forests of Montana's Bitterroot Range in the winter of 1883. The logging and fur trade were very profitable, and men with big dreams came to the wilds in search of riches. They set up camp near what is now Blackwater Creek to use as a base for a season of hunting and trapping. The records show that they had a lot of supplies, were well equipped, and knew how to survive on the frontier. Jeremiah Holcomb, the leader of the expedition, had been in charge of similar trips for more than 15 years without any problems. Still, only 9 men would ever come out of those woods, even though things were going well for them. The fact that 18 men went missing is one of the most puzzling mass disappearances in the history of the American frontier. No bodies were ever found. There was never a clear answer. The 9 people who lived through it wouldn't talk about what happened during those 3 months alone in the woods. The following is a reconstruction of events, based on bits and pieces from journals, local newspaper articles, territorial records, and the few testimonies that came out years later when the survivors thought no one was listening. The official story, as told in the Montana Territorial Register on the 17th of April 1883, said that the losses were due to bad weather and possible fighting with native tribes. But records from that winter show that the weather was unusually mild, and the Salish people in the area had been getting along peacefully with trappers for decades. Something else happened in those woods that the survivors tried hard to hide. This is the story of the Blackwater Creek hunting camp and the horrible secret that has been kept hidden for almost 100 years. In 1882, Mill Creek, Montana Territory was a small town with only a general store, a sawmill that gave the town its name, 2 saloons, and a few wooden buildings that served as homes and businesses. It was a valley with mountains on all sides, and men came there to look for their fortunes in lumber, furs, and sometimes gold. The number of people living in the settlement changed with the seasons. It grew in the spring and summer when the passes were clear and shrank as winter approached. But some people saw a chance in the harsh Montana winters, when fur-bearing animals grew their thickest coats and sold for the most money. One such opportunist was Jeremiah Holcomb. He had lived in the territories for most of his life by the time he was 53. He was born in Pennsylvania and moved west as a young man. He worked as a surveyor before becoming known as the person who organized hunting and trapping trips. By 1882, he was well known in Mill Creek and the settlements around it. People knew him as a strict planner, a strict disciplinarian, and a man who always brought his teams back alive. The Mill Creek Gazette from November 1882 has an ad from Holcomb looking for experienced men to go on a winter expedition. It says, 3 months' work, equal shares of profits, previous wilderness experience required. Inquire at Wilson's General Store. According to store records kept in the Territorial Archives, 26 men were chosen from the applicants. Their ages ranged from 22 to 48. Most of them had worked with Holcomb before, or were recommended by his friends. Some were new to the area, but they brought useful skills or resources to the project. The trip was meant to be a business trip, mostly to trap animals with fur and look for good places to log in the spring. On the 3rd of December, 1882, the expedition left Mill Creek with 27 men in 8 wagons full of supplies that would last them through the winter and into the spring. Their names are listed in territorial records: Jeremiah Holcomb, Augustus Reed, Samuel Perkins, Thomas Fletcher, William Norton, Benjamin Lewis, Charles Winston, Jacob Miller, Isaac Thompson, Frank Wilson, Daniel Roberts, Joseph Davis, Henry Adams, George Stewart, Edward Collins, Michael Williams, Robert Taylor, John Anderson, James Martin, David Brown, Richard Evans, Christopher Hughes, Paul Mitchell, Peter Schmidt, Frederick Cooper, Howard Griffin, and Eli Watson. 9 people would come back: Holcomb, Reed, Perkins, Fletcher, Norton, Lewis, Winston, Miller, and Thompson. The rest disappeared without a trace. It took them 11 days to get to the hunting grounds they wanted. They followed well-known paths and crossed the Clark Fork River before heading northwest into less well-known areas. The land became harder and harder to walk on. There were thick pine and fir forests, steep ridges, and narrow valleys with fast-moving streams. Holcomb's journal says that after the fourth day, they didn't see any other people, but they did see abandoned trapper cabins and the occasional prospect hole where a miner had tried to find gold in the ground. They got to their destination on December 14th, a flat area in a valley where 3 streams came together to make what Holcomb called Blackwater Creek. The name came from the dark color of the water, which was stained by the tannins from the plants around it. The site was a good choice from a practical point of view because it had plenty of water, natural shelter from the winds, lots of game trails visible in the light snow, and enough flat ground to set up a big camp. They got right to work building their winter homes. Some of the men cut wood, some cleared land, and some started building the first cabins. Holcomb's journal from December 15th says, "Work is going well. Everyone is doing their part. The weather is good. The first cabin should be finished by sundown. If the weather stays good, we should have all the men in proper shelter within a week." The camp was mostly done by December 21. 7 cabins set up in a rough circle around a bigger building that served as a mess hall and meeting place. A simple stockade made of sharpened logs surrounded the camp. It wasn't meant to keep people out, but to keep big animals away and keep the pack animals from wandering off, which was normal for camps in the wilderness at that time. Holcomb set up routines right away. Men took turns going on hunting trips, setting traps, keeping the camp clean, and guarding it. His journal from this time shows the methodical mind that had made him famous for successful expeditions. It includes detailed lists of supplies, records of daily hunting yields, maps of established trap lines radiating outward from the camp, and careful notes on the weather. There were no major events in the first 5 weeks. The guys got used to their routines. Every day, people checked the trap lines. Hunting groups brought in deer, elk, and sometimes moose to add to their food supply. Beaver, marten, fox, and the very valuable river otter that lived in the streams were among the pelts that started to pile up. Holcomb's journal entries from this time are boring and talk about hunting successes, the weather, and small fights between the men. He wrote on the 2nd of January 1883, "Norton and Schmidt had a heated argument over a card game. I separated them before things got worse. Otherwise, spirits are high. Trapping lines are yielding good results. I expect the first shipment of pelts to be ready by the end of the month." There was no sign of the horror that would soon engulf the camp. During this time, the men were not completely alone. Holcomb's journal says that a system had been set up to take the collected pelts to the nearest trading post, which was a 5-day horseback ride away. There, they could be traded for more supplies, and any necessary communication with Mill Creek could be made. Wilson and Evans were chosen as couriers for the first trip, which was set for late January. They never went on that trip. The first strange thing in the record happened on the 21st of January 1883. Holcomb's journal entry for this date contains a strange note. Reed reports unusual findings along the northern ridge. Claims to have discovered abandoned camp. No sign of occupants. Peculiar markings on trees surrounding site. Will investigate tomorrow if weather permits. The next day's entry is short. Weather did not permit investigation. Reed agitated. Claims to have heard voices in the forest during night watch. Likely overtired. Have assigned him to camp duties for 3 days' rest. 3 days later, Holcomb writes, "Reed still talks about hearing voices in the woods. Now he says they call his name. I've checked him for fever or other illnesses. He seems physically fine, but mentally troubled. Other men are starting to stay away from him." The first sign that Reed's experiences might not be just delusions comes on January 26th. Stewart and Brown report strange noises while checking the northern trap line. They say it sounds like whispering that follows but never gets close enough to be understood. Both men are of sound character and not given to fanciful ideas. They have told all men to travel in groups of 3 instead of pairs until the situation is clearer. The next day's entry is scary. Schmidt didn't come back from the trap line. Cooper and Mitchell were sent to look for him. By nightfall, there was no sign. The search will continue at first light. Cooper and Mitchell found Schmidt's last trap line on January 28. The traps were undisturbed, and there was no sign of Schmidt. There were strange tracks in the snow that might have been from a bear, but the pattern didn't match any bear sign I've seen before. The men were getting more and more worried. January 29. Cooper was missing when we counted in the morning. Mitchell says they split up for a short time to look for Schmidt. When he called out, Cooper didn't answer. Another search party was formed, but they didn't find him. The camp is now down to 3 men. I have ordered that all trapping activities be done in pairs, and no man can leave camp alone. Holcomb's writing shows that he is becoming more worried by February 1st. Men report sounds from the forest at night. They describe them as voices without words. It is likely that the wind is blowing through rock formations and making strange sounds. Still, we have doubled the night watch rotation. A pattern was starting to show. Men were disappearing 1 or 2 at a time without a fight or a sound, and often when they were briefly apart from their friends, the other men were deeply affected mentally. Holcomb's journal shows that the members of the expedition were getting more and more tense, fighting, not sleeping, and what he calls nervous disorders. February 3rd, Mitchell was found about a mile from camp, confused and disoriented. He says he was led astray by familiar voices. A medical exam shows no physical injuries, but he is very tired. He talks about the door in the cave, but gets upset when asked more questions. They have given him whiskey and laudanum to calm him down. Things got worse very quickly after this. Holcomb's entries are less frequent and more upset in tone. Mitchell found dead this morning. No apparent cause. Body cold. Features frozen in expression of extreme terror. Men insist on burial outside camp perimeter, despite frozen ground. 4 hours to dig adequate grave. Roberts led prayer service. Morale at lowest point. That same day, Watson, Hughes, and Taylor didn't come back from their hunting trip. Griffin and Anderson volunteered to help look for them. They were reluctantly allowed to do so, even though it was getting dark. By midnight, neither they nor the hunting party had returned. The camp was now down 8 men. The remaining men insisted on gathering in the central hall instead of going to their own cabins. They agreed to this for the sake of morale. There is a big gap in the journal between February 5 and February 18 when entries start again. Their character and content have changed a lot. Holcomb's handwriting, which is usually very neat, looks shaky and rushed. He doesn't keep track of dates as well anymore. Sometimes he just writes day or night next to an entry. One entry that doesn't have a date just says, "They watch from between the trees. They are not what they seem to be." Another, 7 more are gone. They went to get water. The creek is only 200 yards from camp. We heard no struggle or cries for help. They just disappeared from one moment to the next. The others wouldn't talk about it, as if silence would keep us safe. The last entry, which is thought to be from late February, says, "We leave at first light, the 9 of us who remain. We burn everything we can't carry. We tell ourselves that if we keep a steady pace, we will reach Mill Creek in 10 days. We tell ourselves that we will be safe in the light. We tell ourselves a lot of things." What happened during those 2 weeks in February that are missing? The journal doesn't give any answers. Later statements from the survivors are inconsistent and often don't make sense. The only other document from this time that is still around is a piece of what looks like a personal diary that was found among Benjamin Lewis's belongings when the survivors returned to Mill Creek. There are only 3 entries in the fragment, and they are all undated. The singing is coming from beyond the ridge now. Mitchell says it's coming from the cave, but there is no cave. Mitchell is sick. None of us are well. Reed says they're getting closer. He says they wear the faces of our missing friends like masks. He says he can see what's behind the masks when they blink, but he won't tell us what he sees. Holcomb told us not to talk about it because it gives it power, but silence hasn't kept us safe either. We are 19 now, and there will be fewer of us tomorrow. On the 12th of March, 1883, the 9 survivors came out of the woods. The Mill Creek Gazette says that they came separately, not as a group. First, Reed and Miller came to town, stumbling in just after dawn. At noon, Winston and Thompson got there. The others came in before nightfall. But Holcomb was the last to arrive, just as it was getting dark. Their health was bad, but not life-threatening. They looked like they had been outside for a long time, were malnourished, and were tired from a long winter journey, but they didn't have any serious injuries, frostbite, or wounds that could explain why their friends were missing. But their mental health was very bad. The Mill Creek Gazette of the 14th of March, 1883 says, "The men seem very different from when they left 3 months ago. They jump at sudden sounds, avoid direct eye contact, and speak little." When asked for details about their trip, they give accounts that are so different that they seem to be trying to hide something or are confused because of what they went through. Authorities quickly became suspicious because their stories about what happened were so different. Reed said they had broken up during a snowstorm. Miller said there hadn't been a blizzard. Instead, an unknown mountain tribe had attacked. Winston and Thompson wouldn't talk at all. The other people gave conflicting accounts of what happened, and each one was not consistent with the facts or with what the others said. They all agreed that 18 men had died. There were still disagreements about how, why, and where. There was no clear answer. The territorial governor sent Sheriff James Blackwood, who was Theodore Blackwood's great-grandfather and would later look into the incident, to talk to the survivors and see if there was enough evidence to charge anyone with a crime. Sheriff Blackwood's report, which is still in the territorial records, ends with this: "While their stories don't match up, there is no physical evidence of wrongdoing. The men seem more traumatized than guilty. I suggest they get medical help instead of going to court." Doctors who looked at the survivors saw strange symptoms. Subjects have a strong dislike of darkness and insist on keeping lamps lit all night. They react with extreme fear to certain sounds, especially wind in trees or distant animal calls. Several people report having the same nightmare of being called into the forest by familiar voices. I recommend continued observation. On March 20th, the territorial governor sent out a recovery team led by Lewis and Fletcher. The official report they filed when they got back said that they couldn't find the hunting camp. Both guides seemed lost in an area they should have known well. The expedition came back empty-handed after 10 days of looking without success. This failure led to more speculation. The Mill Creek Gazette asks on April 2nd, "Were our guides purposely misleading the recovery team? If so, what horrors are they trying to hide? If not, what could confuse men who had successfully navigated the same terrain just weeks before?" A second bigger trip in June 1883 finally found the camp's remains. They found the burned remains of cabins, which matched what Holcomb wrote in his journal about burning everything before leaving. There were no signs of violence or struggle, no personal items, and no human remains. The official report says, "The site looks like it was quickly abandoned, but not in a chaotic way. There is no sign of an attack or natural disaster. The fate of the missing men is still unknown." The official report doesn't mention this, but Alexander Reynolds, the team's cartographer, wrote about it in his private journal. Reynolds writes, "I found an unusual cave formation about a mile north of our campsite. The entrance was partially hidden by fallen trees. The walls inside were covered in markings that I had never seen before. They weren't Indian pictographs, minor symbols, or natural formations. They were geometric patterns that seemed to change shape when viewed from different angles. After 2 team members reported hearing voices coming from the cave, the expedition leader ordered it to be sealed with dynamite. The explosion worked, and the entrance completely collapsed." After giving their testimonies, the 9 survivors went their separate ways. Most of them left Montana Territory for good, according to records. Augustus Reed moved to Oregon. Samuel Perkins moved to the state of California. The others also spread out across the country and didn't talk to each other. Jeremiah Holcomb is said to have stayed in Mill Creek for a short time before leaving for Seattle in late 1883, according to records that are available. He gave his journal, which he had taken out of the woods, to the territorial archives, with the promise that it would stay sealed for 75 years after his death. In 1960, it was finally opened. Holcomb died in 1885, and it is said that he did it himself. The mystery might have ended there, becoming a part of local folklore if it weren't for Theodore Blackwood, a graduate student at the University of Washington who found Holcomb's journal while working on his doctoral thesis about frontier settlements in 1962. Blackwood was obsessed with what happened at Blackwater Creek. His research notes, which are kept in university archives, show that he did a thorough investigation that lasted almost a year. He looked through county records, newspaper archives, church registries, and personal letters that had to do with the survivors and their families. Most importantly, he talked to the living relatives of the 9 men who came out of the woods in 1883. These interviews show some very troubling trends. Martha Reed, Augustus Reed's granddaughter, said that her grandfather never slept in the dark and kept loaded rifles at every door and window until he died in 1884, just a year after he came back. William Perkins, the grandson of Samuel Perkins, told family stories about his grandfather's episodes, times when he would say that friends who had died were watching him from the corner of the room and had faces that didn't fit right. Blackwood's research also showed that 7 of the 9 survivors died within 2 years of returning, most of them by suicide or in strange circumstances. In October 1884, Augustus Reed shot himself. In January 1885, Samuel Perkins drowned in the Sacramento River, even though witnesses said he was a good swimmer. In March 1884, Thomas Fletcher was found hanging in his barn. The coroner said he had an extraordinary terror look on his face. Jacob Miller and Isaac Thompson were the only ones who lived to be old. In their later years, they both became recluses. Miller passed away of natural causes in 1927 when he was 76 years old. Thompson lived longer than them all. He died in 1931 at the age of 82. Edward Thompson, Thompson's son, found a sealed envelope in his father's personal papers after his death. The envelope said, "To be burned unread upon my death." Edward Thompson kept the envelope but did not read what was inside, as his father had asked. He gave it to Blackwood unopened, but Blackwood convinced him that the historical value of what was inside made it okay to break this promise. There was a long story inside about what Thompson said happened at Blackwater Creek. The document, which is dated the 3rd of January 1930, starts with the words, "I am the last living witness to what happened at Blackwater Creek in the winter of 1883. As death approaches, I feel the need to record the truth, though I have spent my life hiding it. Let this account serve as both confession and warning." Thompson says that the problem started several days before Schmidt went missing, not when he disappeared, as Holcomb's journal says. Thompson writes, "Reed found the cave, not an abandoned camp as Holcomb wrote. The entrance was half hidden by fallen trees. Inside, Reed found strange markings carved into the stone walls. They weren't Indian signs or miners' markings. They were something older that none of us knew what they were. Reed took other people to see what he had found. 7 of us went into the cave with Reed," Thompson continues. "Holcomb said he couldn't go because he had to check his trapping lines. Inside, we found markings that went deep into the mountain. Fletcher, who had some schooling, said they looked like no language he knew, but they were very precise. Roberts noticed that they seemed to change when we looked at them from different angles, as if they were moving under our gaze." Thompson talks about how they found a room deep inside the cave system. The walls opened up into a space bigger than our mess hall. In the middle stood what Roberts called a door frame with no door, a perfect rectangle of stone standing on the cave floor. The only thing that could be seen beyond it was the far wall of the chamber. But something about that frame made us uneasy. The air around it seemed to waver, like heat rising from summer rocks. Thompson says that what happened next doesn't make sense. Schmidt was closest to the frame. He reached toward it, not touching it, just pointing. He said he felt a cold draft coming through. Then he stepped forward, as if to go around the frame. Instead, he passed through it. One moment he was there. The next, he was gone. No sound, no flash of light, just gone, as if he had never been. There was a lot of panic. The men ran away from the cave and back to camp. They told Holcomb and the others what they had seen. Most people thought it was a joke or a case of hysteria. But Cooper and Mitchell were sure Schmidt was just playing a big joke and insisted on going back to look into it. They never came back. From this point on, Thompson's story gets more and more disturbing. He goes on to say that men kept disappearing over the next few weeks, not just from the cave, which they had sealed shut with fallen trees, but also from the camp itself. They were taken when they were alone. A man would go behind a cabin to be alone, or walk to the edge of the clearing to use the bathroom and never come back. There were no tracks leading away and no signs of a fight. The voices were even scarier. Thompson writes, "After the first week, we started to hear them. Familiar voices calling from the forest. Schmidt's voice, Cooper's voice, each man who had disappeared calling to those who were still there, asking for help, begging to be let back into camp. We kept strict discipline. No one answered, and no one went outside after dark. But every night, the voices got closer and sounded less human." Thompson's description of what they saw at the edge of the forest was the most disturbing. They looked like our missing friends, standing just beyond the firelight. But something was off. Their proportions were slightly off. Their movements were too fluid or too stiff. Their faces were blank, even when they were calling out in obvious distress. And their eyes. When the firelight hit them, they didn't reflect back red like an animal's might. Instead, they reflected back a deep, impenetrable black. Thompson says that by February, the survivors had broken up into groups. Winston led one group that wanted to leave the camp right away. Another group, led by Roberts, said they had to find and bring back their missing friends. Holcomb said they should wait for better weather before trying to get back to civilization. Roberts and his group went into the woods one morning with guns and a strong desire to find the missing men. This was the last straw. Thompson writes, "They left camp when they were 15. By nightfall, none had come back. We heard their screams all afternoon. At first, they were far away. Then they got closer, and then they stopped all of a sudden. When darkness fell, 17 figures stood at the edge of the forest. Our missing friends, Roberts among them, all standing still and watching the camp, all with the same blank look on their faces. The 9 who lived through it all got away the next morning. They left quickly, taking only a few supplies and leaving a lot of their gear behind." Thompson's story starts to fall apart here as he talks about a 10-day trip through the woods that was very hard. "We didn't go together," he says. "That was our only hope. We split up and each man went his own way, using the sun and stars to stay on a southeastern course toward Mill Creek. During the day, the forest was just a forest." Thompson never says what was chasing them at night. He only writes, "They are not gone. They are never gone. They found a way through, and now they walk among us. They look like men, but they are not men, and they are spreading." The document ends with a strange warning. "If you see a man who doesn't cast a shadow at noon, who doesn't blink in strong wind, and who says your name as if he's learning how to say it, run. Don't look back. Don't answer when he calls after you. What wears his skin is not a man at all." Theodore Blackwood became convinced Thompson's account, while perhaps distorted by trauma and time, contained elements of truth. His research notes show that he is becoming more and more concerned with checking specific facts. He looked at geological surveys to make sure there were cave systems in the area. He talked to older people who lived in the area about local stories that happened before the Blackwater Creek incident. He made a list of people who have gone missing in the Bitterroot Range since the first European explorers came to the area. Most importantly, Blackwood tried to find the descendants of the 18 men who went missing. He didn't find any. There are no death certificates, estate records, family Bibles, or church registries that mention them. It was like they had never been there, except for their names on Holcomb's expedition list. Professor Lawrence Merritt, Blackwood's faculty advisor, was worried about how erratic his students' behavior was becoming. Merritt writes in a letter to the department chair on the 12th of May 1963, "Blackwood has given up all pretense of academic objectivity." He talks about the Blackwater incident as if it were happening right now, not 80 years ago. He hears strange noises outside his apartment at night. He carries a sidearm saying it has silver bullets in it, but I think this is just a strange joke. I recommend a leave of absence. Blackwood left Seattle for Montana before anything could be done. The last time anyone heard from him was on the 7th of June 1963, when he sent a postcard to Merritt saying, "Leaving tomorrow for the Bitterroot Range. I have the coordinates for the camp location. I will verify Thompson's account directly. If I do not return by July 1st, please call the Sheriff's Department in Missoula." Records from the university show that Blackwood left Seattle on the 8th of June 1963. He never came back. 3 weeks later, a search party found his empty campsite. They found all of his research materials, including Thompson's account. Blackwood was never found. The University of Washington's Department of History officially closed Blackwood's case in September 1963, saying he was missing and likely dead because of an accident in the woods. Most people forgot about his research until 1968, when Professor Marion Leech found it while organizing departmental records. Leech was interested in Blackwood's results, so she did her own research. She never went into the field. Instead, she looked at historical records and talked to people who lived in the Bitterroot area. Her research found a disturbing pattern. There had been a lot of disappearances in the area around Blackwater Creek since the first Europeans came to the area. In the 1,820 seconds, French trappers called it La Forêt qui prend, which means the forest that takes. Native legends said there was a thin place where the line between worlds could be crossed under certain conditions. Leech's most important finding was that the 9 people who survived the 1,883 incident were not the only ones who came out of the forest that season. From March to October 1,883, 11 strangers showed up in towns all over Montana. Men who had never been to the area before, men who couldn't or wouldn't say where they came from, and men who, according to local records, acted and spoke strangely. Leech made a list of these people using records from the area, newspaper articles, and church records. One of them was John Smith, who probably used a fake name. He showed up in Helena in April 1883 and was described in police reports as speaking in a monotone voice and standing still for hours. They were arrested for being homeless, but got away. There is no record of what happened next. When Thomas Green got to Butte in May 1883, he set up shop as a barber. Customers said he hardly blinked and only breathed when he talked. The store was found empty in October 1883, and there are no more records. William Jones got a job as a school teacher in a small town near what is now Missoula in September 1883. School records say that he was unusually quiet and liked to watch kids without saying anything. Gone after parents complained about their kids having nightmares. No record of what happened next. The pattern was always the same. Men would show up out of nowhere, act strangely, stay in communities for a short time, and then disappear without a trace. In the years that followed, Leech found similar cases in nearby states and territories, which suggests that the cases spread out from the original location over time. Leech's research resulted in a monograph entitled Echoes from Blackwater: Displacement and Identity in Frontier Catastrophe. The university said it wouldn't publish her work because of concerns about how it was done. Leech quit her job in 1969. We don't know where she went after that. The last document in the University of Washington's archive about the Blackwater Creek incident is a letter from Edward Thompson, the son of survivor Isaac Thompson, to Professor Leech. It was written in July 1969. It reads in part, "Your inquiry regarding my father's account has caused me considerable distress. I had hoped the document would remain unread, as he wished. Now that its contents are known, I feel compelled to share one additional detail. In his final years, my father became convinced he was being watched. He installed locks on every door and window of his home. He refused to go out after sunset. The night before his death, he called me to his bedside and said, 'They've found me at last, the ones who took Schmidt and the others.' They wear their faces still, though it's been 50 years. I dismissed this as the rambling of a dying man. Now, having read your summary of his written account, I am less certain. Last week I saw a man standing across the street from my home. He remained motionless for hours, watching my house. When approached by a neighbor, he identified himself as Peter Schmidt, the name of one of the men who vanished in 1883. The neighbor thought nothing of it, but I remembered my father's stories. I am leaving town tomorrow. I advise you to abandon this line of research. Most people have forgotten about the Blackwater Creek incident. In the early 1900s, the area became part of national forest land. Blackwater Creek is no longer named on modern maps. We still don't know exactly where Thompson's hunting camp and cave are, but sometimes reports come out of the area that sound like parts of the original event. A group of 5 men who were surveying timber resources went missing in 1922. In 1947, 3 hikers went missing from a marked trail. Their gear was found neatly arranged next to the trail. A family of 4 went missing while camping in 1958. Their car was found with a flat tire at a Forest Service road turnout. Records from the Forest Service, from the 1,940 seconds to the 1,960 seconds, show strange animal behavior in the area. For example, birds would stop singing in the middle of a song. Game animals would leave their usual areas, and predators would avoid certain areas for no apparent reason. Rangers who worked in the district often asked to be moved. Some people said they heard voices in the woods, especially at dusk. People systematically dismissed these reports as the result of being alone and having a hard time at work. A geological survey was done in the area in 1965 as part of a larger resource assessment. The report from the survey team has a strange footnote that says, "Anomalous acoustic properties observed in Sector G7. Sound appears to reflect in unpredictable patterns, creating the impression of voices where none exist. Recommend further study by qualified acoustic specialists." However, no such study was ever done. An internal memo from the U.S. in 1967, the Forest Service's regional office talks about unauthorized excavation in the same area, evidence of recent digging discovered by Ranger Patrol. Appears to be an attempt to access a cave system. No permits issued for archaeological or geological exploration in this sector. Recommend increased patrols. The patrol reports that followed show that no suspects were found. What really happened to the 18 men who disappeared from the Blackwater Creek hunting camp in 1883? The official explanation, bad weather and possible conflict with native tribes, only holds up under the most basic scrutiny. The survivors' conflicting stories point to an intentional effort to hide the truth. Thompson's story, which may have been affected by trauma or mental illness, fits with local legends and later events in ways that are hard to ignore. The most troubling thing about Thompson's last writings is that they suggest that whatever the men saw in the woods didn't stay there. His assertion that they are spreading implies a threat that is not confined to a distant wilderness area, but rather one that could arise anywhere. He wrote, "They look like men, but they are not men." A warning, a false belief, or the record of an ongoing infiltration. One last document is worth looking at. In 1967, while doing routine maintenance on the Montana Historical Society archives, a staff member found a letter that had not been cataloged before. It was apparently written by Jeremiah Holcomb shortly before his death in 1885 and was addressed to the governor of the territory but never delivered. The letter has only one paragraph. "I write, not to confess, but to warn. We brought something back with us not in our hands or in our packs, but in our minds. A door once opened cannot be fully closed." They watch me now as I write these words. They wear familiar faces: Schmidt, Cooper, Roberts, and the others. They stand at the corners of my vision, patient and expectant. They know I will join them soon. But before I do, know this: they are not confined to the forest any longer. They walk the streets of your towns. They sit in your churches and your council meetings. They may wear the faces of those you once knew. Trust nothing. Trust no one. The door stands open, and they continue to come through. The letter was put away and ignored as the rantings of a man going crazy, but Thompson's story and the patterns that Blackwood and Leech found make it seem more scary. Something strange happened in Seattle in 1968. Police records show that a man named Theodore Blackwood was arrested for disturbing the peace. The report from the arresting officer says, subject was bothering pedestrians and saying he had just come back from Montana after spending 5 years in the woods. Subject looked confused and underfed, and his clothes were torn but strangely clean, as if he had just put them on. When asked who he was, subject became agitated and said, "I am not Blackwood. Blackwood is gone." Subject was sent to Western State Hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. The hospital's records show that the man was let go after 3 days because he was not a danger to himself or others. The doctor's notes from the exam say, "The patient speaks in strange ways, often stopping mid-sentence, as if listening to voices that aren't there. He keeps his eyes fixed on the doctor without blinking for long periods of time. He says he is Theodore Blackwood, but he doesn't know anything about Blackwood's academic work or personal life. The man disappeared after he was released. There is no record at the university that anyone claiming to be Theodore Blackwood ever got in touch with them. When a reporter talked to his family in 1970, they said they hadn't heard from him since he went missing in 1963. In the years after the 1968 event, Seattle newspapers sometimes reported seeing a man who looked like Blackwood. In 1971, the Seattle Times published a short piece called "Missing Professor Spotted Downtown." It described a thin man in old clothes who said he was Theodore Blackwood and was seen standing still for hours outside the University of Washington Library. When campus security looked into it, they didn't find anyone who fit this description. The forest is still there. Blackwater Creek still flows, even though it has a new name. No one has ever officially found the cave, if it exists. In December 1882, 27 men went into the wild. Only 9 came out. What happened to the other 18 people, and what could have happened to them, is still one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries of the American frontier. While patrolling what is now the Lolo National Forest in 1972, Park Ranger David Corbin wrote an unusual incident report. This area is thought to be where the Blackwater Creek camp was located. The report talks about meeting an old man in old-fashioned clothes at a remote trailhead. Corbin says that the man said he was Peter Schmidt and that he was waiting for my companions to return from their trap lines. When Corbin told him that trapping was not allowed in the National Forest, the man smiled and said, "The forest has its own rules." When Corbin called for help on the radio, the man disappeared. After a search, no tracks were found, leading away from the area. Corbin's report ends with a personal note. The subject's behavior was very disturbing. They kept eye contact without blinking and spoke in a monotone voice. Their skin looked waxy or fake under the flashlight. I asked for permission to avoid solo patrols in this area. Permission was granted. The next year, Corbin moved to Yellowstone National Park. Similar reports came out from time to time in the area. A hunting group said they saw men standing still among the trees at dusk in 1985. The hunters said they looked like old-time trappers and were watching us without saying anything. When people got close, the figure supposedly ran back into the woods, moving in a strange way and at a strange speed. The hunters cut their trip short, saying the encounter had spooked their horses. In 1994, a group of college students on a weekend hike said they heard voices calling from off-trail near sunset. One student left the group to look into it and never came back. 2 days later, search and rescue teams found the missing student. He was confused, suffering from exposure, and had no idea where he had been. The report says that during his rescue, he kept saying, "They wear familiar faces, but they are not who they say they are." The discovery made while building a new fire access road in 2002 was probably the most disturbing. About 10 miles from the nearest known historical settlement, workers found what looked like the foundation of an old cabin. An archaeological study found that the building was built in the late 1800s. One of the artifacts found was a metal button with the initials PS on it. This could link it to Peter Schmidt, one of the missing trappers. The archaeological report says that the cabin looked like it had been set on fire on purpose, and there is evidence that the fire started from inside. The Bitterroot Range has been completely mapped, its forests cut down and grown back, and its animals studied a lot in the years since Blackwood went missing. Still, even today, local guides tell people not to camp near some unmarked streams. Employees of the Forest Service leave the district at higher rates than similar jobs, and hikers sometimes report strange things happening. Voices calling from thick underbrush, Figures seen moving between trees that look like they are almost human, but not quite. Rachel Carter, a documentary filmmaker, started looking into the Blackwater Creek incident in 2013 for a possible series on historical mysteries that have not been solved. Her production notes, which she shared with her coworkers, show that she took a methodical approach. She interviewed local historians, looked at old documents, and scouted locations in the Lolo National Forest. Her last email to her producer, sent on the 18th of September 2013, said, "I think I've found the real Blackwater campsite. It matches Holcomb's descriptions perfectly. I'm going to do a final scout tomorrow with a local guide. If it checks out, we'll start filming next week." Carter never came back from that trip to scout. They found her rental car parked at the start of a trail, locked and untouched. She couldn't find her camera gear. The guide she had planned to meet said she never showed up for their meeting. Search efforts went on for 2 weeks, but they had to stop because it snowed early. When they started up again in the spring of 2014, they couldn't find any sign of Carter. 3 months after Carter went missing, a weird video was posted to her business YouTube channel. The shaky and partly hidden video shows a heavily wooded area at dusk. A woman's voice, probably Carter's, says, "Day 3 of my solo search. I think I found it." These foundations match what was written in Holcomb's journal. The camera moves across what looks like stone foundations that have been overgrown with plants. The voiceover goes on to say, "There's something else here, a structure that isn't on any of the maps." The video shows a rocky outcropping that might have an opening in it. The camera gets closer, and you can see that it's dark beyond. The narrator's voice gets more excited. This has to be the cave Thompson talked about. The entrance was supposed to have fallen in 1883, but here it is. I'm going to go inside and look around. The video gets darker, and the only light comes from the camera itself. There are stone walls with faint markings that match Thompson's description. The narrator's voice is now quiet. These marks seem to change when I look at them from different angles, just like in the story. The camera goes deeper into the cave. The video suddenly becomes unstable, as if the person holding the camera had tripped. There is a short view of what looks like a rectangular stone structure that stands on its own in the cave's interior. The narrator gasps. The camera falls, and all you can see is the rock floor. The audio goes on for about 30 seconds, with footsteps, quick breathing, a sound that might be voices in the distance, and then silence. There is a black screen for the last 10 minutes of the video. Audio analysis shows faint sounds during this time, like footsteps and distant voices that audio experts say are not clearly identifiable as human speech. The last few seconds have a whispered phrase that listeners have interpreted in different ways. The most common way to understand it is, "They're wearing our faces now." YouTube took the video down within 24 hours because it broke the rules about disturbing content. There are copies of it on different internet archives. Law enforcement looked into the upload but couldn't figure out who had accessed Carter's account. Her case is still open. The 9 people who lived through Blackwater Creek took something with them when they left the woods. They either had physical proof or a secret they kept until they died. It may never be known for sure what that secret was, whether it was just the trauma of watching their friends die in the wild or something much worse. We do know that 27 men went into the woods, but only 9 came out. In the years that followed, strange figures began to show up in settlements all over the area. People who looked like men but were somehow off in ways that were hard to explain, according to those who saw them. A hiker found a stone arrangement that looked like a cairn in a remote part of the Lolo National Forest in 2018. Under the main stone was a metal box that was badly rusted but still closed. There was a handwritten note on old, damaged paper inside. Most of the text was unreadable because it had been damaged by water, but some phrases were still clear. "Found the cave again, despite the collapse. They continue to come through. Wear our faces but cannot perfectly mimic. Must recognize them by their stillness, their fixed gaze. I do not trust even familiar faces in the forest." The note was signed T, which could be Theodore Blackwood, but handwriting analysis couldn't be done because the paper was in such bad shape. The spot was about 15 miles from where Blackwood's campsite was found in 1963. The Forest Service worker who first looked at the note asked to be moved the next week. He only said in his exit interview that he didn't feel safe working alone in that district anymore. When asked for more details, he refused to say anything more, saying, "Some things are better left unspoken." Over the past few years, paranormal researchers and conspiracy theorists have become more interested in the Blackwater Creek incident. There are hundreds of posts on internet forums that guess what happened to the 18 men who went missing. Some theories are boring, like bear attacks, tribal wars, and fighting within the same group. Others are more exciting, like alien abduction, portals between dimensions, and possession. The claims of modern encounters are the most disturbing. More than 30 posts have been made on different forums since 2010 about experiences in the Lolo National Forest that are similar to what happened at Blackwater Creek. Voices calling from thick forest, figures that move in strange ways, and men in old-fashioned clothes who stand still among the trees. A lot of these claims can be written off as hoaxes or misunderstandings, but the fact that they match up with historical records is troubling. In 2021, a small group of anthropologists from the University of Montana did a small archaeological survey in the area where they think the Blackwater Creek campsite is. Their first report says that there is evidence of people living in the area in the 19th century that is consistent with a temporary camp. They found multiple cabin foundations, signs of deliberate burning, and no human remains. The survey had to end early because some team members said they were hearing things that weren't there and were feeling mentally ill. In a later interview, Rebecca Stern, the team leader, said, "Something about that place affected my team psychologically." 3 experienced field researchers all reported the same symptoms: voices calling their names, peripheral visual disturbances, and deep, irrational fear. I've worked on archaeological sites across North America for 20 years and never seen anything like it. We collected our samples and left. None of us would think about going back. The samples taken included soil from the cabin's foundations, pieces of burned wood, rusted metal objects, and stone from the entrance to a nearby cave. The first look at the cave stone showed that it had strange properties, tiny patterns that seemed to change depending on the angle of observation, which fits with both Thompson's account and Blackwood's notes. When 2 lab techs said they were having headaches and hearing things after being around the samples for a long time, the study was stopped. After that, all the materials were sealed and put away in a safe place at the university. They turned down Dr. Stern's request for a more thorough investigation. The official reason given was a lack of money. Colleagues said unofficially that university administrators had gotten worrying information about the site from federal agencies. They might still be walking among us. The woods hold their secrets. The door that was once open is now slightly ajar, and the sound of what happened at Blackwater Creek in the winter of 1883 still echoes through the thick woods of the Bitterroot Range, a warning that was not heeded. A mystery that hasn't been solved, a horror that hasn't faded with time. A hiker told Forest Service workers about a strange thing that happened to them in 2022. While he was resting at a stream crossing far away, he saw a man in old-fashioned clothes standing still on the other bank. The man said he was Jeremiah Holcomb and that he was waiting for my men to return from their trapping lines. The hiker didn't think much of it at the time because he didn't know the name was important in Perfote history. But when he told a ranger about the meeting, the ranger recognized the name right away. A later search of the area turned up no tracks or signs that someone else had been there. The ranger's report ends with, "Possible case of mistaken identity or fabrication." Alternatively, the witness met someone who knew a lot about the area's history and was reenacting it. No further action is needed. The report was filed and then forgotten, but the questions remain. What if the 18 men who disappeared in 1883 never really left the woods? What if whatever took their place is still around, wearing borrowed faces and acting like people just well enough to pass casual inspection? What if Thompson's warning, "They look like men, but they are not men," was not a hallucination, but a desperate truth? The Blackwater Creek incident does not provide clear answers, only unsettling possibilities. Without definitive proof, we must each determine the degree of credibility to assign to the narratives of traumatized survivors, fixated researchers, and contemporary witnesses. The explanation may be commonplace, The psychological consequences of isolation, the inaccuracy of historical documentation, and the human propensity to identify patterns and fabricate narratives from coincidence. Or maybe something truly unexplainable happened in those woods, something that continues to affect lives far away from the original event. Maybe the door Thompson talked about is still open, a way between worlds that was never really closed. Pay close attention. Their voices might be calling your name in the space between heartbeats. And if you hear them and feel drawn to the dark spaces between old trees, remember Thompson's last warning. If you see a man who doesn't cast a shadow at noon, doesn't blink in strong wind, and says your name as if learning how to say it, run. Don't look back. Don't answer when he calls you. Not a man at all is what wears his skin. In 1883, 27 men went into the Montana wilderness on what was supposed to be a routine trip. It ended in mystery and horror. 9 of them came back, and their lives were never the same. The other 18 disappeared, either into history or into something even stranger. We don't know what really happened to them. Their story is a sad footnote in the history of the American frontier. The woods are still there. Blackwater Creek still flows, even though it has a new name. And in the thick woods of the Bitterroot Range, something is watching and waiting. Something that wears faces that are familiar. Something that calls out with voices you know. Something that came into our world through a door that should have stayed shut. In 1883, 27 men went into the woods. Only 9 people walked out. What about the rest? You might not think they are that close.